Well, good evening. If you will please take your Bibles and turn them to Proverbs 31. Proverbs 31 is where we'll spend most of our time this evening. I feel like I should begin by introducing myself. I feel like I have been everywhere but here. There was a sweet lady out in the lobby before services that came up and said, "Are you visiting with us?" I said, "Well, something like that, but that's okay." But I greet you from as the sign says, free state of Florida. I spend lots of time down there. I was joking earlier. They said, "Did you see any beaches?" I said, "No, but I saw lots of conference rooms, and they look exactly the same there as they do here." And I must just tell you, in the spirit of full transparency, preaching here makes me somewhat nervous. I've preached for over 20 years, which doesn't really mean much except for I'm getting older. And I've spoken at lectures and different events, and it doesn't bother me because you just speak and then you may never see those people again, and that's just not how it is here. And so hopefully I'll share some thoughts that will be helpful to you in your walk with the Lord. When we come to Proverbs 31, we often jump immediately into the virtuous woman portion at the end of the chapter, and it is certainly a beautiful portrait. I would submit to you, however, that the text does not begin in verse 10. The text begins in verse 1, not with a portrait, but with a plea. Listen to the words of verse 2. "What, my son, and what, son of my womb, and what, son of my vows?" I prefer the English Standard's translation, "What are you doing, my son?" Back when I was in the classroom, I would ask that question repeatedly. What are you doing? And generally that was followed up with a question, what are you supposed to be doing? And so as we read this passage, I believe it is very much in that same spirit that this mother is asking her son, what's going on? This triple question is poetic, but it is more than just poetic. It is emotional. It is urgent. There is a great deal of weight behind it. You can almost hear a mother's voice trembling with passion and love and concern. This is the kind of question that grabs someone by the heart and says, "Are you listening to me? Do you understand?" These words are not just a mother making conversation. This is a mother who has prayed for her child. She has carried him in her womb, and now she watches him bear the weight of leadership and decision making. She knows the stakes are high. And it is interesting, when you look at the book of Proverbs holistically, this is not an isolated moment, but rather an idea that runs as a theme throughout the book. The voice of a parent speaking to a child. That is, after all, how the book begins in Proverbs 1. Proverbs 1, verses 8 and 9. "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck." And so you have the voice of a parent speaking with the intention of instilling some virtues that will last beyond the life of that parent. Proverbs 1, beginning of verse 1, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity. Now, what a child chooses to do with that instruction will either bring great joy or deep sorrow. And as parents, we know that sometimes the actions of our children bring us great joy, and sometimes they bring great sorrow. And sometimes our actions bring our own parents great joy or great sorrow. Proverbs 10:1, a wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. Proverbs 17 and verse 25, a foolish son is a grief to his father and bitterness to her who bore him. And so as we work through the text this evening, what we're going to find is that this mother's advice is timeless, touching at least 3 critical areas that every man needs to hear. She first tells him, don't let your judgment be clouded, not by pleasure, not by power. She warns against giving strength to destructive passions like lust and intoxication. Proverbs 31, beginning in verse 3, going down through verse 5, do not give your strength to women, your ways to those who destroy kings. It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine or for rulers to take strong drink, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed and pervert the rights of all the afflicted. Don't allow your judgment to be clouded. That's more than just a mother's advice. That's godly wisdom passed down through the generations. This is God's wisdom still speaking to us today. Leadership demands clarity and control because leadership brings with it increased responsibility. In fact, one author has observed that this wisdom is given in the special context of power and the heightened obligation which it brings. Jesus himself would allude to the same principle in Luke 12 and 48 when he says, everyone to whom much is given, of him much will be required. Wisdom is essential for anyone who finds themselves in authority. Proverbs 8 and 15, by me, that is by wisdom, kings reign and rulers decree what is just. Certainly, we may not all be kings, but we are all called to walk in wisdom. Notice the words of the Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5, beginning in verse 15, he says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Walk in wisdom, and that depends on sober thinking. The very next verse, verse 18, be not drunk with wine, in which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. As we go back to the book of Proverbs, Proverbs repeatedly calls for discretion. Proverbs 3, verse 21, my son, lose not sight of these, keep sound wisdom and discretion. He goes on to say, they will be life for your soul and adornment for your neck. In Proverbs 5 and 2, that you may keep discretion and your lips may guard knowledge. Now, as we get back to our passage this evening, Lemuel's mother mentions 2 dangers that can cloud judgment. Women and wine. Women can weaken a man's discernment. Do not give your strength to women, she says. That is not a condemnation of women in general. After all, the chapter ends by praising a noble, virtuous woman. But this is a targeted warning against destructive relationships which would undermine wisdom and self-control. Now, let's be honest. Have you ever found yourself in such a relationship? And maybe from a carnal sense, it feels right, it feels good. There are blessings and pleasures that come with that, but you know it's weakening you spiritually. Proverbs is filled with warnings about two kinds of women. First, the immoral or adulterous woman. We are introduced to her back in Proverbs 2, and we are told that her path leads to destruction. Proverbs 2, verse 16, "So you will be delivered from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words, who forsakes the companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God, for her house sinks down to death, and her paths to the departed. None who go to her come back, nor do they regain the paths of life." The proverb writer would speak again of her in chapter 5 and in chapter 7 and in chapter 23. And each time the result is the same. In fact, one purpose of the godly instruction found in the book of Proverbs was to keep men away from this type of woman. Proverbs 6, beginning in verse 23, "For the commandment is a lamp, and the teaching a light, and the reproofs of discipline are the way of life, to preserve you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. Desire not her beauty in your heart. Do not let her capture you with her eyelashes. For the price of a harlot is only a loaf of bread, but a married woman hunts down a precious life." And so you have the adulterous woman. But I would submit to you that not every danger comes in seduction. Some comes in strife. Proverbs also introduces us to the quarrelsome woman. Proverbs 19 and verse 13, the text says that a wife's quarreling is a continual dripping of rain. And the idea, I believe, that we can pull from this is that a man, particularly one who is a bit passive in nature, as many men are, might very well just go along with something in an effort to keep the peace. Proverbs 21 and verse 9, "It's better to live in the corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a quarrelsome wife." Verse 19, "It is better to live in a desert land than with a quarrelsome and fretful woman." Proverbs 27, verses 15 and 16, "A continual dripping on a rainy day and a quarrelsome wife are alike. To restrain her is to restrain the wind, or to grasp oil in one's right hand." And so you get to a point where you say, it's just not even worth the trouble. And so whether it is temptation or whether it is contention, both types of relationships can drain a man's strength and cloud his mind. And then Lemuel's mother says, it's not for kings to drink wine. We also see that the abuse of alcohol can inhibit clarity. One writer observes, wine dulls the judgment in the exercise of royal functions. Strong drink causes leaders to act in undignified ways and causes them to lose the respect of their subjects. As I read that, I'm reminded of the events surrounding the beheading of John the Baptist. What did that center around? It centered around a king who got drunk and made some foolish decisions. Proverbs warns continually about the overindulgence of alcohol. Proverbs 20:1, wine is a mocker, strong drink, a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. It is linked to wickedness. Proverbs 4:17 speaks of the wine of violence. Proverbs 26:10 connects the drunkard with a fool. It causes ruin, including poverty, injury, confusion, sorrow, and addiction. Proverbs 23 and verse 20, be not among drunkards or among gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and slumber will clothe them with rags. He goes on to say, beginning in verse 29 of that same chapter, who has woe, who has sorrow, who has strife, who has complaining, who has wounds without cause, who has redness of eyes, those who tarry long over wine, those who go to try mixed wine. Look not at the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup and goes down smoothly. In the end it bites like a serpent and stings like an adder. Your eyes will see strange things and your heart utter perverse things. You will be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, like one who lies on the top of a mast. They struck me, you will say, but I was not hurt. They beat me, but I felt it not. When shall I awake? I must have another drink. And so we see the abuse of alcohol and the effects thereof. And when you don't have self-control, you are left without defense. You are left without direction. You are exposed to danger. Proverbs 25 and 28 says, a man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. And so we must ask, are there relationships in your life, romantic or otherwise, that are pulling you away from the counsel of God? Are you indulging in earthly pleasures that are dulling your spiritual discernment? Are you living with restraint, or have you let down your guard? You see, we must understand that when judgment is clouded, destruction is not far behind. And that is why Proverbs high centers on a call to heed wisdom, so that our lives will be molded by discretion, not destruction. Don't let your judgment be clouded. Lemuel's mother continues in Proverbs 31 and 6, give strong drink to the one who is perishing, and wine to those in bitter distress. Let them drink and forget their poverty and remember their misery no more. Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. And so we see her second piece of advice, and that is to have compassion for others. With power comes great responsibility and also great opportunity. And so Lemuel's mother is not only telling him what to avoid, she is also telling him what to embrace, what a godly leader should do. Her words call him to use his position to serve the weak, to defend the vulnerable, to protect the voiceless. This is more than political advice. It is a call to righteous compassion. She points out what a king should care about. Verses 6 and 7 are not an encouragement of drunkenness, but rather an illustration of compassionate relief. In the ancient world, as many of you know, strong drink was used in a medicinal way to dull pain, much like morphine or hospice care would be used today. And so what Lemuel's mother is saying is that a wise king, a godly king, looks for ways to bring comfort to those who are suffering, to ease the burden of those in pain. And certainly a king's power can be used either to heal or to harm. Proverbs 29 and 4 says, by justice a king builds up the land, Proverbs 16:15, in the light of a king's face there is life. And so a wise king can bring stability and blessing to his people, but a ruler can also bring destruction. Proverbs 16:14, a king's wrath is a messenger of death. What we must see is that God deeply values compassion and justice. And this call to care for those who are needy, again, that's not an isolated command, but rather that is woven into the entire fabric of the book of Proverbs. We've already read in chapter 1 about how wisdom is the learning of righteousness and justice and equity. God Himself defends the widow and the poor, Proverbs 15 and Proverbs 22. Proverbs 19 and 17 says, whoever is generous to the poor is actually caring for the Lord. The Lord identifies with the poor, and He expects His people to do the same. Proverbs 29 and 7, a righteous man knows the rights of the poor. A wicked man does not understand such knowledge. Proverbs 22 and 2, the rich and the poor meet together. The Lord is the maker of them all. God's people should speak on behalf of those who cannot speak for themselves. We are to be advocates for justice, not merely enforcing it. And so, as we think about wisdom, true wisdom is not only about making good decisions, that is certainly part of it, but it is also about living in a right way toward others. We also see that compassion comes with both reward and consequence. Proverbs 11 and verse 24 tells us that there is a blessing for those who show compassion. Proverbs 11 and 24, one gives freely yet grows all the richer. Proverbs 28 and verse 27, whoever gives to the poor will not want. But we are also told that there is judgment for those who ignore the needy. Proverbs 11 and 24, the second part of that verse says, another withholds what he should give and only suffers want. Proverbs 28 and 27, the second part of that verse says, he who hides his eyes will get many a curse. And so we must ask the question to ourselves, are we using the influence that we have to lift up those in need, or have we remained silent when others needed a voice? Are we more concerned about preserving our own comfort than relieving someone else's pain? Have we grown numb to the suffering that surrounds us, assuming that someone else will help those people? Do we speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves? Are we generous toward the needy, or are we guarded with our time and our talent and our treasures? Scripture makes it abundantly clear God sees how we treat other people, and God cares deeply about that. And so Lemuel's mother is not just giving advice to a king, she's giving a call to action for every person who claims to walk in wisdom. Show compassion to others. And that brings us to the portrait of the virtuous woman. Beginning in verse 10. An excellent wife who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hand to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hand to the needy. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. She makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchant. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. There are some who would say that this text is not coming from Lemuel's mother, that it needs to be elsewhere in the book of Proverbs. And I really don't want to litigate that this evening. It works a lot better for our discussion. And thematically, it works well right here where it is in the text as the third piece of advice. And that is, you need to make sure you pick the right person. One of the most significant decisions that a man can make is deciding with whom he is going to walk through life. This woman is representative of the principles of wisdom found throughout the book. Now, we've met the adulterous woman. We've met the contentious or quarrelsome woman. Elsewhere in the book of Proverbs, we are introduced to folly depicted as a woman. But here, we have a model of character rooted in the fear of God. And the lesson is simple. You need to make sure that you align yourself with people who will live wisely and build you up. This is in contrast to the destructive relationships warned about earlier. Do not give your strength to women. They'll take whatever is yours, she says. But here we have a woman who strengthens her husband. Her presence in his life enhances his standing, contributes to his effectiveness as a leader. Verse 23, her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. And so that begs the question, what kind of woman will do her husband good and not harm? A woman who is hardworking and talented. The text overflows with descriptions of her diligence. She seeks wool and flax. She works willingly with her hands. She buys and sells wisely. She plans ahead. She provides for her own. The emphasis here is not merely filling a domestic role. The emphasis here is that you have someone who is utilizing an industrious spirit. She is utilizing wisdom, which then bears fruit through her efforts and through her creativity. Her success is not born of idleness. It is not born of privilege. Someone has not handed this to her on a silver platter, but rather her success is born out of thoughtful labor. And yet, it is not self-centered. She is an accomplished woman, but she is concerned for others. And so you're looking for someone who cares deeply for others. Verse 15, she takes care of her household and her maidens. Verse 20, she opens her hand to the poor. Verse 27, again, she looks well to the ways of her household. And so her wisdom is not just shown in how efficient and effective she is. It's also shown in her compassion and care for others. This is a life lived for others, not just self. And this is the same spirit Lemuel was encouraged to have earlier in the text. And so what we do should flow from a deep sense of responsibility and love for those that God has placed in our lives. And ultimately, what kind of woman are you looking for? You're looking for one who's godly. Yeah, you want one who's hardworking and talented. That's good. One who cares for others. But where does all of that come from? That comes from godliness. What sets this woman apart is not that she's making you some money. What sets this woman apart is not her physical beauty. It is her fear of the Lord. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She opens her mouth with wisdom and kindness. That is why she is called virtuous. That is why she is called excellent. And so, with whom are you aligning your life? There are many in this world, and there are some even in this room, who can tell you what happens when you pick the wrong person. And maybe even there are some of us still trying to get it right. But we need to ask ourselves these questions. Are the people who are closest to you building you up in the Lord, or are they drawing you away from Him? Which is more important to you, character or charm? Godliness or appearance and status and accomplishment? And so if you are single, and there are many of you who are you looking for someone who will do you good and not harm? Someone who will help you grow in wisdom? Or are you being drawn to someone whose influence may actually undermine your walk with the Lord? And then if you're already married, are you being the kind of person described in this text? Someone who is reliable, hardworking, compassionate, a fearer of God? Are you someone who brings strength and stability to your home? You see, Proverbs is all about wisdom, and then as it comes to the end, it gives us a living picture of what wisdom looks like when it is fully embraced, when it is lived out. The question is, are you choosing to live with people who live that kind of life? And are you becoming that kind of person yourself? And so, as we bring our message to a close, I want to go back. I want to go back to the very beginning. I want to go back to that mother's question. What? What are you doing? What, my son? And what, son of my womb? And what, son of my vows? But this time, I don't just want to limit the question to Lemuel. We need to think about ourselves. What kind of judgment are you exercising in your life right now? What kind of compassion are you showing to those who are in need? What kind of relationships are you choosing or pursuing? You see, all of those things are mother's questions, absolutely, but they are also God's questions. And the same God who spoke through Lemuel's mother still speaks today through the Scripture. Absolutely. But I dare say, even through the words of loved ones whose values are aligned with Scripture and who care enough about us to tell us the truth. What are you doing? We need to answer that question. With lives that are marked by wisdom and compassion and godly character. If someone asks you, it's because they care about you. It's because they love you and they want what is best for you. And so we do not need to be defensive or resistant in those moments. But we need to be honest and open and have a perspective that is willing to examine these questions and come to answers. And when the answers don't match up with what we know God would have us to do, we need to make the proper course corrections. And maybe there's someone even tonight who needs to do that. Are you living out these principles of wisdom? Or are you doing things you know you shouldn't be doing? Because again, as I read this passage, that's the image that I get. You know better. What are you doing? My friends and brethren, you know better. You know better. Some of you are engaged in relationships you shouldn't be in, and you know better. Or you're addicted to things that you know you have no business being addicted to or engaged in. What are you doing? Some of you are put in positions of power, and there is great responsibility that comes with that. And you're not taking care of business. What are you doing? Others of you need to step into positions of power. Maybe that's you take leadership and ownership of your family, or maybe that's you take a leadership role within this church, and you know what you ought to be doing. What are you doing? What are you doing? Answer that question. If we can help you to that end, won't you come? I'll go, we stand, sing this song.